The wind howled through the rusted gates as Emma stepped onto the cracked pavement. Her flashlight beam cut across the skeletal remains of a prison long forgotten, its walls swallowing the light as if hiding secrets too dangerous to reveal. Every step echoed like a whisper from something or someone that still lingered inside. She didn't know yet if she was here to uncover the truth, or to join it. Emma stood still for a moment longer, her breath ghosting in the cold air. The iron gates loomed in front of her, streaked with the black veins of rust, their hinges sagging under decades of disuse. She reached out, pressing her palm to the corroded metal. It was colder than she expected, almost damp, as though the prison's very bones were sweating under the weight of all it remembered. A sound broke the stillness, not the wind, not her own breath. It was faint, like the creak of wood shifting under an unseen weight. Emma's head turned toward the prison yard beyond the gates, but her flashlight beam found only weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. There, heads swaying in the breeze. She pushed the gates open, the hinges screaming in protest, and stepped through. Gravel crunched under her boots. She could feel the weight of the prison pressing down on her from all sides, as though the place resented her intrusion. The walls rose high and sheer, pitted with rot, their watchtowers now hollow sentinels, staring blankly into the night sky. She had read about this place for months before coming here. The stories were contradictory. Some spoke of riots that left the cell blocks drenched in blood. Others claimed the prison had simply been abandoned overnight, its inmates and guards vanishing without explanation. No official record told the whole story. The state archives were missing files. The local library's newspapers had whole weeks torn from their bindings. She had even contacted 2 retired guards, both hung up without a word as soon as she mentioned the prison's name. Emma tightened her grip on the flashlight. She told herself it was just a building, just bricks and steel and shadow, but even the shadows here felt sentient. She made her way toward the main entrance. The wooden doors were warped, the paint flaking in long curls that hung like peeling skin. She pressed one shoulder against the door and pushed. The hinges resisted, then yielded with a long, low groan. The stale air that spilled out smelled of mildew, rust, and something she couldn't name, something faintly metallic but not quite blood. Inside, the darkness was different. It wasn't just the absence of light, it felt thicker, heavier, as if it had mass. Her beam swept across the floor, shards of broken glass, discarded papers swollen from years of moisture, and the faint scroll of graffiti in places her light could barely reach. Something moved. She froze, listening. The movement was soft, deliberate, almost cautious. Her eyes darted to the far end of the hall. The beam landed on a piece of torn fabric caught on a nail, fluttering faintly. That had to be it. Just fabric. She told herself to keep walking. Footsteps echoed off the high ceiling, each one returning to her a fraction later, as though the sound had to travel further than it should. She passed door after door, each marked with peeling paint numbers. 1, 2, 3. Some had locks still hanging from them, orange with rust. Others gaped open, their insides dark and empty. She stopped at cell 7. The door hung ajar, the bars bent slightly, outward, as though something had forced its way out. She aimed her flashlight inside. The walls were covered in scratches, not graffiti, not art, just long, uneven lines etched into the concrete, deep enough to catch the light. They were too high for a prisoner lying down, too low for someone standing comfortably. Emma stepped inside, brushing her fingers against the marks. The edges were sharp, even now. Her heart was starting to race. She could hear it in her ears, pounding in time with the dull throb that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She backed out of the cell, turning to face the hall, and nearly dropped her flashlight. The beam had caught a shape at the far end, tall. Still watching, she blinked, and it was gone. Emma's breath came faster now. She told herself it was just her mind, primed by too many late nights reading stories in dim light. But she kept glancing back as she moved deeper into the prison. She reached the central block, a massive open space where several hallways branched off like veins. The upper levels were walkways of rusted steel, their railings missing in places. Her beam climbed the walls, revealing row after row of cells stacked like open mouths. Somewhere above her, something fell, a soft clatter, like a small object hitting metal. She aimed her light upward, but the glow dissolved before it reached the 3rd tier. Her boots scraped against the floor as she moved toward the nearest stairwell. The steps were coated in a layer of dust so thick that each footprint she left felt like a signature. She kept one hand on the railing as she climbed, the metal flaking under her touch. At the 2nd tier, the air felt colder. Her breath came in shallow bursts now, misting in front of her. She stopped outside cell 28. The door was shut, but there was something strange about it. The padlock was brand new. She crouched down, inspecting it. The brass was untarnished, the steel gleaming faintly in her beam. It didn't belong here. Her fingers brushed the lock. It was warm. She pulled back instantly, heart pounding harder than before. She didn't want to open it, and yet she couldn't walk away. Her hand returned to the lock. She twisted it experimentally. It clicked open without resistance. The door creaked inward. The cell was empty, completely empty. The floor was bare concrete, unmarked, except for a single object in the center, a cassette tape, its label worn blank. Emma stepped inside, kneeling to pick it up. She turned it over in her hand, the plastic cool and dry. A faint smell of dust clung to it. She slipped it into her coat pocket, intending to examine it later when she turned to leave. The cell door slammed shut behind her. She spun, grabbing the bars, yanking hard. The door didn't budge. Her beam whipped across the cell, searching for another exit, but the walls were solid. Her pulse roared in her ears now. She looked back toward the door and froze. There was a hand wrapped around the bars, pale, long fingers, pressing from the other side. Emma stumbled back until she hit the far wall. Her flashlight shook in her grip, the beam stuttering over the bars, but the hand was gone. The door creaked open slowly, as if inviting her out. She stepped forward cautiously, her legs trembling. The hallway beyond was empty, but it felt different now, as though something unseen had taken an interest in her. She walked faster, her boots striking harder against the metal walkway. She didn't look back again until she reached the stairs. When she did, there was something standing in the open doorway of cell 28. It wasn't moving. It wasn't breathing. It was just there, watching. Emma didn't wait. She ran down the steps, her flashlight beam slicing the dark. She didn't stop until she was back in the central block, her chest heaving, her breath sharp in the cold. She needed to leave, but some part of her, the part that had brought her here in the first place, whispered that she was closer now than she had ever been. That whatever this place was hiding, it had noticed her, and it wasn't going to let her go so easily. Emma stood in the center of the cavernous block, her flashlight beam shivering against rusted bars and empty cells. The air seemed thicker now, as though every breath she took had to be forced through an invisible weight. She turned in a slow circle, trying to listen past the sound of her own heartbeat, but the silence was different from before. It was no longer the quiet of abandonment. It was the quiet of something waiting. She knew she should leave, walk out the way she came, push through the gates, and not look back. But her feet stayed planted. She hated herself for it, but the pull was undeniable. A faint sound came from one of the branching hallways, a scrape followed by a dragging noise, then silence. Emma's beam found the entrance to the corridor narrow, its ceiling lower than the main hall, with the shadows pressed close against the walls. She took a step toward it, then another. Her boots crunched over debris that looked like the remains of shattered light fixtures. The hallway felt different from the rest of the prison. The smell was stronger here, mildew, dust, and something sharper underneath, like burnt metal. The walls were stained in long streaks, and in places paint had bubbled and cracked as though from intense heat. She passed cell after cell, all of them closed. The small, square windows and the doors were clouded with grime, but she could still make out vague shapes inside bunks, toilets, the outline of something slumped in the corner that her mind kept trying to turn into a person. At the end of the hallway, a single light flickered. Emma froze. It wasn't her flashlight, it was an actual bulb, hanging from a frayed cord, buzzing faintly as it swung. She had seen the prison from outside. The power was long gone. There was no reason for any light to be working. She approached slowly, her own beam dimming under the sickly yellow glow. The bulb cast wild shadows on the far wall, and for a moment she thought she saw movement there, not the swaying of the cord, but something deliberate. The bulb gave one last flicker and went out. The darkness was instant, absolute. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She fumbled with her flashlight, the beam flaring to life just in time to catch the briefest impression of something turning the corner ahead. She followed. The corridor narrowed again, the air growing colder with each step. She could feel it seeping through her coat, settling into her bones. The walls here were lined with small doors, none of them numbered. Some were sealed shut, others hanging open to reveal spaces barely large enough for a person to stand. She didn't know if they were punishment cells or storage closets, and she didn't want to find out. She reached the end of the hall. Thing she had been following, if it was real, was gone. Only a single door remained, set slightly ajar. It was heavier than the others, its surface dented and scarred. Emma pushed it open. Inside was a small room with no windows. The only furniture was a table, its surface layered with dust except for one clean rectangle where something had recently been placed. And removed on the center of the table now sat a tape recorder. Emma's pulse quickened. Her mind went to the cassette in her pocket. She took it out, holding it up to compare. Same size, same worn plastic. She hesitated. This was too perfect, too staged, as though someone or something had left it here for her. She set the cassette into the recorder and pressed play. The tape, word, static filled the room, faint and irregular like the sound of breathing filtered through a storm. Then, a voice. It was low, distorted and male. You came too soon. Emma's hand tightened on the edge of the table. You shouldn't be here yet. The static surged, swallowing the words, and then the voice returned. It's still awake, and it remembers. A loud click cut the recording short. The silence afterward felt sharper than before, like the room itself was holding its breath. Emma reached for the tape, but the recorder's buttons jammed. She pulled harder. The cassette wouldn't come. Out. From somewhere deep in the prison, A door slammed. She turned, her beam slicing through the doorway and into the hall, but there was nothing there. And then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Emma backed toward the far wall, her hand fumbling for the recorder again. She tugged until the cassette popped free, shoving it back into her coat pocket. The footsteps reached the doorway and stopped. She aimed her flashlight at the opening, empty dot, but the footsteps began again, this time inside the room. Her pulse roared in her ears. She swung the beam wildly, but it caught nothing. No figure, no movement. Just the bare walls and the dust-shrouded table. Then the light flickered dot in the brief darkness between the flashes. Shapes began to form, faint outlines, barely human, shifting in and out of view. She couldn't tell if they were moving toward her or if the room itself was stretching, drawing them closer. Emma bolted. She sprinted down the hallway, her boots pounding against the floor, her beam jerking from wall to wall. The corridor seemed longer now, the end retreating with every step. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear them, the footsteps multiplying, closing in, some fast, some slow, some so near she could feel the vibration through the floor. At last, the central block opened ahead of her. She stumbled into the open space, her legs burning, her breath sharp and ragged. She turned her light back toward the hall. Empty. But the silence that followed was worse than the pursuit. Emma's hands were shaking as she reached into her pocket. The cassette felt heavier now, as though it had absorbed something from that room. She didn't know what the message meant, but the way the voice had said it sent a chill through her deeper than the cold ever could. She realized she had been clutching the recorder too, but when she looked down, it wasn't in her hands. It was gone. Her mind reeled. She hadn't dropped it. She hadn't set it down. It had simply vanished. A faint hum began somewhere above her. She tilted her head, following the sound up toward the third tier of cells. A single light was glowing there now, pale and cold, illuminating a figure leaning against the railing. It wasn't moving. Emma took a step back. The figure straightened slowly, and in that moment she realized it wasn't standing on the walkway at all. It was standing on the outside of the railing, as if the drop below didn't matter. It tilted its head, the motion unnatural, too far to one side. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest. Her flashlight dimmed, then flared painfully bright, before cutting out altogether. When her vision adjusted, the light on the third tier was gone. So was the figure. But the hum remained closer now, almost inside her skull. She turned toward the main doors, forcing herself to move. She had to get out, had to put distance between herself and whatever was moving in the dark. But as she reached for the exit, the sound stopped. In its place came the voice from the tape, but this time it was behind her. "It's already here." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The words were so close she could almost feel them brush against the back of her neck. She spun around, flashlight trembling in her hand, but the beam revealed nothing, only the hollow expanse of the central block and the black mouths of the cell doors above. Her skin prickled. The air felt charged now, heavy with something she couldn't name. It wasn't just fear, it was a sense of inevitability, like standing on the shore and feeling the tide rush in no matter how far back you step. She backed toward the main doors, again keeping her light trained on the shadows. That was when she saw it. It wasn't a figure this time, at least, not in the human sense. It was more like an absence, a moving patch of darkness that didn't belong to the rest of the night. It glided along the far wall, smooth and deliberate, spilling over the bars of the cells as though gravity meant nothing to it. Emma froze. The shadow stopped too, as if it had noticed her noticing. A low, resonant hum began again, the same one that had rattled through her chest before. It was softer now, almost coaxing, like a song heard underwater. The shadow moved. Emma bolted, shoving through the main doors into the open yard. The cold air hit her face like a slap, but she didn't slow down. Her boots crunched over weeds and gravel until she reached the outer gates. She grabbed the metal and yanked. Nothing. The gates didn't move. She pulled harder, her gloves scraping against the rusted iron. Still nothing. It was as if they'd fused shut. The hum grew louder behind her. She turned, pressing her back to the bars. It was standing in the yard now, not a shadow anymore, not exactly. Its outline wavered, as though made of smoke, but within that shifting, with form, something solid seemed to be taking shape. She caught glimpses of a pale hand here, the curve of a jaw there, but never long enough to see a whole face. The thing tilted its head, the same way the figure on the railing had. Then it stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and each footfall sounded too heavy for something that insubstantial. Emma's hand went to the cassette in her pocket. She didn't know why, but she felt like it mattered, like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to herself. The figure stopped halfway across the yard. The hum dropped to a low vibration, and then a voice, clearer than before, emerged from it. "You've opened the door." Emma's throat felt tight. "What are you?" "It doesn't matter what I am. It matters what you've let in." Her pulse hammered in her ears. "I didn't let anything in. You did. When you came here, when you touched it, when you listened." Her mind raced. The cassette, the cell with the new lock, the hand on the bars. What happens now? The figure took another step forward. Its form flickered, and for a fraction of a second, she thought she saw its face only. It wasn't a face at all. just a void that seemed to pull everything toward it. Now, you can't leave. Emma's grip tightened on the cassette. She forced herself to take a step away from the gates, angling toward the side of the yard. There had to be another way out, an emergency exit, a breach in the wall, anything the figure didn't follow. It simply watched her go, its head tilting as though curious. She found a narrow path along the side of the yard, overgrown with weeds. It led to a smaller building attached to the main prison, maybe an administration block or a guard's office. She ducked inside. The interior smelled of damp paper and mold. Her beam swept over rows of filing cabinets, many of them tipped over, their drawers hanging open like broken jaws. Papers littered the floor, some so water-damaged the ink had bled into shapeless stains. She picked one up that was still legible. It was a transfer log, dated only a few months before the prison's closure. Every entry was crossed out except for one. The name had been smudged beyond recognition. But in the reason for transfer column, someone had written a single word in red ink, containment. Emma set the paper down quickly, her hands shaking. A sound came from deeper in the building, soft, rhythmic, like the turning of a reel-to-reel tape. She followed it cautiously, weaving through the debris until she reached a small office. On the desk sat another tape recorder, larger than the first, its reels spinning slowly. The tape wasn't connected to any power source, yet it turned as if driven by an unseen hand. She reached for it, but before she could touch it, the machine clicked, and a voice spilled out. "You think you're the first to come here?" She stepped back, her shoulders pressing into the wall. "You think you'll find the truth, but the truth isn't something you find. It's something that finds you." The reels spun faster. "It's awake now. You can feel it, can't you?" Emma swallowed hard. Her whole body was trembling. "What is it?" The voice paused as if considering. "A prisoner that never left, a cell that never opened, a sentence that never ended." The reels slowed, and the machine stopped. Emma's flashlight flickered once, then steadied. She turned toward the doorway and froze. The figure was there, filling the frame, its form shifting like smoke in a jar. She lunged for the window. The glass was cracked, but still intact. She slammed her elbow into it once, twice, 3 times before it shattered, the shards raining onto the floor outside. She climbed through, cutting her palms on the jagged edges. Outside, the cold bit into her skin. She was in a narrow alley between the admin block and the outer wall. The ground here was uneven, scattered with chunks of brick and rusted metal. She could see the corner of the wall ahead if she could reach it. Maybe she could climb. She ran. Halfway there, the hum began again, louder this time. It pressed against her skull, made her vision blur. She stumbled, catching herself on a piece of pipe jutting from the ground. When she looked up, the corner of the wall was gone. The alley stretched further than before, the end retreating like a mirage. She turned to look back, and the way she'd come was gone too. Her breath came fast and shallow. She turned in a slow circle. The alley was endless now, stretching in both directions, the walls pressing closer. A voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere. "This is the cell." Emma pressed her back against one wall. The cassette clutched so tightly in her hand her knuckles ached. "Let me out. You came here for answers. You'll stay until you understand." The hum swelled, and the walls began to move, shifting like living things. She tried to run, but the space narrowed faster than she could move. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was the figure, standing at the far end of the narrowing alley, waiting. The walls pressed closer until Emma's shoulders scraped against the crumbling brick. Dust fell into her hair, her coat, her eyes. She tried to twist sideways to move faster, but the narrowing space forced her into a slow, shuffling crawl. The hum vibrated in her bones, growing louder with each heartbeat. The figure at the far end didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence alone filled the alley, making the air heavy, almost liquid. The space between them seemed to stretch and contract at once, a distortion that made Emma's head throb. "Stop," she shouted, her voice ragged. "I'm not supposed to be here." The hum dipped, shifting into something almost like a laugh. "Low and without joy, you were always here." The words didn't echo. They landed directly in her skull, bypassing her ears entirely. She clamped her hands over her head as if that could block it out, but the voice seeped through her bones. The walls trembled. A thin crack split open in the brick beside her, releasing a breath of air that smelled of rust and damp earth. She pressed her face to it, desperate for any escape, and saw darkness beyond, not the darkness of night, but a black so complete it felt like a surface, a wall of ink. The hum deepened again, and the walls jerked sharply. The crack widened, enough for her to slip one arm through. She didn't think, didn't plan, she just forced herself sideways into the gap. The brick tore at her coat and skin, but she pushed until she was through. Her flashlight beam caught only empty space. She stumbled forward, realizing too late she was no longer in the alley. The ground beneath her feet was smooth concrete, stretching endlessly in all directions. Above her, there was no ceiling, only a void so deep it felt like she was standing inside an unlit cavern the size of the world. Behind her, the crack was gone. Emma's breaths came fast and shallow. Her footsteps made no sound here. Even her heartbeat felt muffled. as though the air itself absorbed every noise. Somewhere ahead, a light appeared. It was dim, flickering, but steady enough to draw her forward. She walked toward it, her legs trembling with each step. As she drew closer, she saw it was a bare bulb hanging from a cord. The cord didn't lead to a ceiling. It vanished upward into the void. Beneath the light was a single chair, and on the chair, a figure sat with its head bowed. Emma stopped several feet away. "Hello." The figure lifted its head slowly. It was a man, or had been once. His skin was pale and stretched thin over sharp bones. His eyes were milky white, but they locked on her with unnerving precision. "You brought it," he said. His voice cracked and brittle. Emma clutched the cassette in her coat. "Brought what?" "The key," he rasped. "The cell only opens from the inside, and now you've given it the door." Her mouth went dry. "What's in the cell?" The man's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not what who." He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, as though each joint resisted him. "It was meant to stay here. That's why they built this place the way they did. Every stone, every lock, every wall, all for one prisoner." Emma shook her head. "You mean all the other inmates were never real?" the man interrupted. "Or they were shadows of something else? Distractions? This whole prison was the cell, and the prisoner was never meant to leave." Her grip on the cassette tightened. "Then what happens if it does?" The man stepped closer, and for the first time, she realized his feet made no sound either. "You've already seen it," he whispered, "and it's already seen you." The light above them flickered. Emma glanced up, but when she looked back, down, the man was gone. The chair was empty. The hum began again, faint at first, then swelling until it filled the entire space. The bulb swung violently, casting the shadows of the chair in dizzying arcs. Emma turned and ran. Her feet pounded against the silent concrete, the light receding behind her until it was swallowed by the void. The hum followed, pulsing in rhythm with her steps, like it was matching her pace on purpose. Ahead, she saw another light. This one was brighter, warmer. She sprinted toward it, her lungs burning. When she reached it, she found herself in a corridor again, narrow, with barred doors on either side. Relief hit her for a split second before she realized every cell she passed was open. Inside each one, a figure stood perfectly still, facing the door. Some looked human, others didn't. Their proportions were wrong, too tall or too thin, or their limbs bent at impossible angles. None of them moved, but she could feel their gazes following her. She forced herself not to look directly into their faces. She didn't want to see their eyes. Halfway down the corridor, she heard a voice. "Emma." She froze. It wasn't the hum voice. This one was familiar, almost painfully so. It was her mother's voice. She turned toward one of the cells. Inside, in the dim light, her mother stood exactly as Emma remembered. Same sweater, same warm eyes. "Emma." Her mother said again, smiling faintly. "Come here." Emma's throat tightened. "You're not her." Her mother tilted her head, the smile never changing. "Come here," she repeated, softer this time. Emma backed away. The figure in the cell didn't move, but her voice followed, growing quieter until it was almost a whisper. "Come here." Emma turned and ran again. The corridor twisted unexpectedly, doubling back on itself until she was certain she'd passed the same cell 3 times. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The hum was back, woven through the walls like a pulse. Finally, she burst into another open space, the central block. Only this time it wasn't abandoned. Every tier, every walkway, every cell was filled with silent figures, all facing her. None moved, none blinked, but the hum was deafening now. She took a step back, and the figures stepped forward in unison. Another step back, another synchronized advance. Her back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. Then from the 3rd tier, a single figure stepped forward, the same smoke-shifting outline as before, but denser now, almost solid. It leaned on the railing, looking down at her. "You've carried it far enough," it said. Emma's hand went to the cassette instinctively. "Play it," the voice commanded. She shook her head. "No." The hum rose to a painful pitch, forcing her to her knees. Her fingers clawed at the floor. "Play it," the voice said again, sharper this time. Her resistance faltered. She pulled the cassette from her pocket, her hands trembling. The figure began to descend the stairs. With every step, the figures in the cells moved closer, closing in around her. Emma looked at the tape in her hand, then at the narrowing gap between her and the approaching wall of bodies. Her thumb found the play button. Emma's thumb hovered over the play button, her breath sharp and ragged. The circle of figures closed in, their movements synchronized like the ticking hands of a clock. The smoke-shifting figure on the stairs took another step down, its gaze fixed on the cassette in her hand as if nothing else in the world existed. The hum was a roar now, shaking the air, vibrating through her bones. It pressed into her skull until her vision blurred at the edges. She pressed play. The recorder clicked, the tape whirred, and then silence. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The figures froze mid-step, the hum stilled, and even Emma's breath seemed suspended in the air. Then the voice began. It was not the voice she had heard before, not the distorted warning, not the low murmurs in the dark. This voice was deeper, layered, as though 1,000 voices were speaking in perfect unison. The cell is open. The words were not loud, yet they filled every corner of the prison. Emma's skin crawled. She glanced around, expecting the figures to advance again, but they remained utterly still. The voice continued. You carried the key. You turned the lock. Now the prisoner walks. Emma's stomach dropped. What prisoner you know? The stairwell figure stepped onto the floor. Solid now, a man's shape, but wrong in ways Emma's mind couldn't fully hold. Its proportions shifted subtly as it moved, to fluid, as though it were being poured into the shape rather than inhabiting it. The figures in the cells began to sway gently, side to side, in rhythm with the voice on the tape. Emma's instincts screamed at her to run, but the circle was closing again. The stairwell figure stopped an arm's length away. It didn't reach for her. It simply tilted its head and waited. You wanted the truth, it said, not from its mouth but directly into her mind. Emma's lips trembled. What are you going to do to me? Show you. The tape clicked again. A sound spilled out. Faint at first, then louder, a single heartbeat. It wasn't hers. It was too slow, too heavy. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the heart were the size of the prison itself. The moment it reached its full rhythm, the lights in the prison lights Emma hadn't even noticed were on began to flare and die in sequence, tier by tier, moving toward her like a wave. When the last light above her went out, she was plunged into blackness. Something brushed her arm. She jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. The figures were all around her now, their forms indistinct, in the dark, their presence pressing in on every side. The heartbeat sound grew faster, then came the scream. It tore through the darkness, high and raw, so loud Emma dropped the recorder. The cassette clattered on the concrete, still spinning. The scream wasn't human. It carried something inside it, a distortion that made her teeth ache, a note that scraped at her bones. The sound didn't just fill the air. It filled her head, her chest, her stomach. The smoke figure was no longer in front of her. It was behind her. Its breath, if it was breath, cold against the back of her neck. Now you see, it whispered. Emma's knees buckled. She hit the floor, her palms stinging against the concrete. She was shaking so hard she almost didn't notice the ground shifting beneath her. The central block was stretching, twisting. The walls drew back into the dark, and the tiers above seemed to rise higher and higher until they vanished entirely. The heartbeat became a drumbeat, shaking the floor through the blackness. She saw a door, massive, made of steel, with chains wound tightly across it. The sound was coming from behind it. The smoke figure moved toward the door, each step leaving ripples in the ground like water. The other figures parted to let it pass, their heads bowing as it approached. Emma wanted to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She could only watch as the figure reached the chains and pressed its hands against them. The chains snapped like thread. The heartbeat stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath and then inhaling for the first time in a very, very long time. The steel door swung open. Emma saw nothing beyond it. No room, no walls, just a depth so absolute it made the void she had seen before feel shallow. From that darkness, something stepped forward. It was enormous, yet its outline was unclear, shifting constantly, as if it could not settle on a single shape. Each flicker revealed something different, a hunched silhouette with too many limbs, a tall figure with a face of light, a crawling thing with hands for feet. When it moved, the air buckled around it. The other figures fell to their knees. Emma's mind screamed for her to look away, but her body stayed rooted. The thing in the doorway turned its head toward her, though it had no eyes. She knew it saw her completely. The smoke figure stepped aside, bowing its head. Yours, it said. The thing crossed the threshold. The ground shook violently, cracks spidering across the concrete. Dust fell from somewhere above, though Emma could see no ceiling. The air grew colder with every step it took toward her. She finally found her voice. I didn't mean to, you did, the layered voice from the cassette said, still playing on the floor. The thing reached her. It bent down, and though she wanted to recoil, her body refused. Its face was both too far away and far too close. It pressed something into her hand, small, cold, and metallic. When she looked down, it was a key, old, rusted, and heavy. For the next door, the thing said, though she didn't hear the words so much as understand them. Before she could speak, it was gone. The figures, the smoke shape, the open door, all gone. She was standing at the prison gates. They were open now. The night air swept over her, sharp and clean, carrying no trace of the rot and dust she had been breathing moments before. The gravel crunched under her boots as she stepped outside. Behind her, the gates swung shut with a final clang. In her hand, the key gleamed faintly in the moonlight. She didn't know where the next door was, but deep down she knew she would find it, or it would find her. And somewhere far behind those gates, in the dark heart of the prison, a new voice began to hum. For more untold truths, keep watching The Forgotten Cell.